happens. But in light of Bobby's game and Jofi's workflows and my projects, little side projects going on, it seems like it's worth taking a little bit of time going through some things about like kind of startup mindset, startup processes, how it works. And a lot of this, I'm no like serial entrepreneur, startup, Y Combinator mentor. So I'm working on the flies with everyone here as well, kind of learning as we go along. But but it's worth like trying to figure out. Some people out here on the internet, you'll see them cooking up little mini web apps or tools or whatever else, and just make this a startup that goes from basically zero to infinite based off of a good idea and good execution. And so there's a recipe here that works to bring people income. Um, Obviously, with those successes that you see on X or Instagram or whatever else, those success stories that you hear about and see um, are also like are a small minority. So let's remember that if we get a mini SaaS developed and shipped, and we don't get any users the first day, that ends up being $300,000 a month in recurring revenue right off the bat. Let's just remember to keep at it because it's a small percentage of success stories out there still, as kind of with everything is. But all that being said, we have an Excalibur up. I see some of you already cruising it. Um, we'll just kind of start and go through, like, obviously everything starts with some version of an idea. Well, I guess before we get into the idea and the Excalibur, Brendan, do you have any insight on the initial comments about startup ideas, stuff like that?
I, I was going to say it's just an important thing to keep in mind with startups in general, because it's easy to get really enthusiastic, like, yeah, I'm going to start my own business. Yeah, I'm going to use AI tools. It's all going to be sunshine and rainbows. But the reality is startups are hard. Startups in general are hard. Most fail, and AI tools or not. And as we've discussed before, AI can give you um, quality or a false sense of like what you think the appeal of your product is. So just it's important to not only stay critical as we discussed on previous calls, but stay based in reality. Don't go down that self-confirming rabbit hole that AI can lead you down, about the realities of business, and the need to actually test your product in the real world on the market, which is what we're going to discuss today. And don't be, if you keep that reality in mind, then you're less likely, you'll be more prepared if failures occur or you don't get the result you're expecting. You'll be more resilient, and you'll be able to push through the challenges and struggles and keep iterating, because the people that do make it in business are the ones that accept the failures, learn from them, and continue to iterate. Obviously, if you give up, you're done. And if you're expecting to hit gold on your first try because you've got these shiny new AI tools, then you're probably going to experience more disappointment than you would if you go in thinking, okay, this is going to be a challenge. Lots of people are using these tools. Lots of people are churning out apps. It's still hard to do a startup. You got to be realistic about it to give yourself a better chance to navigate the challenges of running a startup, AI or otherwise.
Is it even worth having expectations at all, or do they serve any purpose, or should, like, if you find yourself in a spot where you're, like, getting excited excited is probably good, but then getting into expectation, I mean, is it better just to refute an expectation and shoot it down in your own brain immediately and just, I mean, you just cruise on with, some healthy levels of excitement?
Yeah, it's about framing. So you want to be positive, you want to be enthusiastic, you want to pursue things with energy. And so to do so, you have to have, some hope that you're actually capable of achieving what you're aiming at. That's really important. That's a big part of motivation. But another part of motivation is being able to navigate the challenges. And so if you expect everything to be easy, and when it's not, which is more probable, you're going to be and experience more negative emotion because you had a naive view of the challenge ahead. And that's what I mean. It's like, this is startups in general. A lot of people have a good idea, but then bringing that idea to market successfully is challenging, and you have to actually be ready for that challenge. So, like, you should expect that it's going to be hard. You should expect failures. You should expect the need to iterate and do market testing, etc. So that's where the expectation should be, and then you're better prepared to meet the challenge.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so as far as ideas, like ideation, this first slide on the Excalibur, like how do we come up with it? There's definitely different ways, you can gain inspiration from listening to others complain about an issue, you can extract insight from pain points from issues that you're personally experiencing. So if you're solving a problem for something that you are encountering, then there's what, like 13 billion people on the planet or something like that. So the odds are fairly decent that if you're experiencing a problem, somebody else is. So if you solve your own problem, and you may you are probably solving a similar problem for somebody else, or the exact same problem for somebody else, and that, but the other person, as long as you can find them, may end up being a potential customer, right? Or at the very least, somebody who can provide feedback to refine your product. An example of a product I'm solving for myself. Let me see if my screen share will work. I think it will. Um, I think the window should work. Um, so I'm like doing a lot of experimenting with the Nillion API, the API key, the test net, and the the developer tools, all these AI like Claude Code or Gemini or whatever else CLI tools you're using. They always seem to uh, they always seem to start, like, if the API key has a problem, a little glitch, it starts reordering your entire app. And because so it's better to, if you can identify if the API key is working or not. If it's not working, then you can tell the tool, the LLM tool, that that's the reason why it's not working, versus that going to fix your entire app. So I built this little mini app tool to help test live the API key, and then generate a report. And then this report um, gives me I can basically copy and paste it into the LLM tool and say like, see, the API key is working, or no, the API key is not working. And then it knows it can move on to troubleshoot other issues. So that's just a mini example of like a tool that I created that I was having the trouble myself. I'm not really, that's not really a product. It's open source. I'm just sharing it in the Nillion community to try and see if anybody else will find it useful. Um, but that's just an example of having a problem for yourself and then working on some solution for it. And
So there you're saying the problem with the API key, when it's not right, the AI will try and find other solutions to why your code isn't working and reorganize things. So obviously that's a really important thing to address out the gate, is make sure that your AI API is set up right when you're writing the code in the AI.
yeah, like the endpoints and the model endpoints and stuff. The reason why I started this was because so my API key was working, everything was fine. And then I didn't know this, but Nillion changed the model. So instead of like llama slash 70B or whatever it was, when the API key was working and my code base was working on that model and that endpoint, and then Nillion changed it, I didn't catch it, and and now my API key was working, but the endpoint was wrong in my app. And what does the LLM, the Claude Code started to do was basically test everything else and rearrange stuff. So it started using a bearer token. It changed the entire app to, instead of using the API key flow, a bearer token, um, and started to use that instead. So like now the problem with that is that the next time, um, when the bearer token rolls over or becomes deprecated, then your app is non-functional because it's relying on a bearer token. So obviously it's important to go through and figure out, make sure you understand what these tools are doing, these AI tools are doing. But if you don't catch it, now you have a broken app because the bearer token isn't working when you think it's working, supposed to be working on an API key. So, and there's tons of other problems that causes too. But
So
think
that's
we
an
did.
issue, ongoing issue, isn't it? Like if you've written code and it's working, and then there's a change to the API key, then you have to actually keep up with that, monitor that situation. Otherwise, it breaks everything.
Yeah, and in that particular situation, it was the model that got updated, and that may or may not happen often, but Nillion has only happened a few times. But if you go with like if you see like on Open Router or something, and of course new models are coming out every other week, so it could, depending on how you set it up, yeah, it could be a definitely recurring issue. So it's important to understand the changes that are being made and when and why, uh, and like try and find the most like manageable flow. Like it's not feasible to go in and change something every other day. So some sort of process that's manageable and automated uh, is is important when you're developing these things.
So could you just set up some kind of automated notification system so that if things aren't working, then you get notified and you can go in and make the necessary change?
Yeah, definitely. There's lots of different ways to do that. Like if you're going on full development, like in a Vercel development, there's notifications like if it's down or as something crashes, you can have notifications set up in that. Pretty sure even like email or Um, you could, if that's insufficient for you, and if you needed like a text or a telegram message or something like that, you could use N8N for automations like that. And it could be like like from user experience too, because if you have a deployment in Vercel and Vercel is saying it's good, it's probably good, but maybe if from maybe there's an issue from the user link somehow that maybe Vercel might not be catching, you could use N8N or other type of automation flows um, to test from the user experience, like completely isolated from your development environment too, which could be helpful. Maybe actually that's something I should think about on one of these tools now that I'm thinking about it.
All right, so let's hit this Excalibur draw.
Yeah, so we got the Excalibur. So ideation, there's a different ways, like we said, you're from yourself, from others, um, and then you want to like validate the problem. Is it an actual problem? And then ultimately, is it an actual problem that somebody's going to pay for, right? Like it's one like this that example I just showed, I don't think it's a pay for type of thing. I think it's like it's already open source. It's kind of like a community helpful tool, right? I don't think it's $1 million idea. But it's still a problem for me and maybe for others. So it's some maybe some low level value there, but your problem validation, like what is the goal for you? Do you need that $1 million idea, or do you need a community helpful tool type situation? Maybe it starts out as community helpful and maybe it molds into a $1 million idea with user feedback, something like that. But validate the problem. Um,
It's a
so
real
here's
important
def
part of checking feasibility early too, is you want to consider, like, people pay for solutions to their problems. And so if you're thinking, okay, here's the idea, what's the MVP? Like, you've got to think, well, what problem is it solving for people? Will people be willing to pay for this? Can they get the solution elsewhere? And so I think checking those things straight out the gate is a good idea, because there's two main reasons why you might be building. One is for learning and enjoyment, and the other is for trying to make something that you can sell. Hopefully you're doing both, but it's a good idea to think about, like, you got to think about the end user, you got to think about the market, what's the solution that you're actually offering, because a lot of people make things just thinking about the concept and how they like it and how it helps them, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to sell anything. This is classic in startup land as well. People have great ideas, but then they either don't know how to market it, which is actually, writing about the problem and how you're going to help people solve their emotional pain point. That's how you market your solution. And also, they're not testing it on the market to see if the problem they think people want solved is the problem that they actually have or want solved. That's where you test, getting your MVP deployed quickly so that you can do market testing to see if the problem that you think is a problem for people really exists, and if they're really willing to, you know, trade effort or money for it, then that's really important. So that's what we're trying to hit today.
Yeah, and as I'm seeing this, like, so, I struggle, I think, right here on a good note, like being able to articulate the problem in 2 sentences. I think I tend to ramble a little bit more than 2 sentences typically. So, but another thing I think maybe should go here, um, is like validation in longevity. You want, if your potential problem or solution solves all this stuff, but it's basically going to be outdated in 2 weeks, you might not want to be spending too much time on that, either for your own personal solution or, for monetary uh, gain for selling it. So maybe we need to add longevity here in the validation checklist. I think it's a good start, like specific target audience, right? Uh, is somebody already paying for it, but it's inadequate? So if you could improve the inadequacy, maybe you have something. Um, is the current solution creating new problems? Then, maybe you create a solution to the new problem, or you go to the root cause analysis of their busted solution and fix the solution. Now you fix that and the new problems that persist. Um, so we have an example pattern here of how this might go down. Some pain points revealing themselves through conversation with professionals, and then experts get in. Some sort of personal frustration confirmed for you, and competitive analysis, obviously. If your total addressable market is huge and there's no competition in the space and you have a problem now, maybe, and a solution to the problem, maybe you start to think about developing this further. And some red flags in your ideas. If it's a nice to have and not must to have. So, maybe people don't pay as much or at all for nice to have things like this little mini app that I just showed you. That's probably, I don't even know if it's a nice to have. It might be a like, maybe a little bit decent to have, but it was helpful for me. So, and that was more in the fun bracket for me, but market is too crowded without differentiation. I think that could go both ways. Market is too crowded or not crowded enough. So if it's a total gap in the market, maybe that's a good sign. But if the market is crowded and there's lots of people, maybe that attention goes where the money goes, or like, so if there's lots of money there, I don't know if too crowded is, that's up for debate for me. If anybody else wants to weigh in on that, we can talk more about that. But I don't know if too crowded is, it's definitely an indicator, but I don't know if it would necessarily red flag.
Depends on the total addressable market. I mean, sometimes there's lots of people offering a product, but it's, a massive market. So there's plenty of room for others to offer products. But the challenge being, if it's a crowded market and there are lots of different choices, then you have to stand out in some way. You have to get attention in some way. So it's like when you give people a lot of choices, they find it harder to choose. And sometimes it means they actually don't end up choosing anything. So you do have to, probably more on the marketing side, but potentially on the product features as well, you do have to differentiate yourself so that you capture attention. Because obviously, if you don't get people in the door, then they don't test your product and they don't decide to buy. And this relates to something I was going to mention earlier, is that you want to try to, not just your value proposition should certainly involve solving people's pain point. This is how my solution solves your problem, but also like you can make it so that they get value out of trying your solution before they even have to pay for anything. They get some value out of it, so it comes across as a completely risk-free thing. In fact, they're getting some value just from trying it. But yeah, that probably comes more on the marketing side as well. But you would have to build that into your product or service in some way, I guess.
Yeah, like all these things work together, marketing, or the product testing, the idea originally. It's all, that's why I think this whole Excalibur is ending up to being this big, huge thing because it is a huge. There's so many parts to it. It's not just a clear like cookie cutter approach to success on this kind of thing. Um, there's a lot to it.
All
So
interactive, right?
yeah, yeah, it's so dynamic that it's like anything could work, but almost nothing does, statistically speaking. Uh,
So this is where the idea of iteration has got to come, because you could spend forever in the planning stage, and meanwhile time has passed. You've spent energy and you haven't produced anything to actually test it in the real world. You've got to eventually just decide to make something, and I think we'll talk about things like deadlines in this call to help you, to help force decisions, help you to actually get out something quickly. And the other thing I was going to touch on is that nice to have versus must have. Nice to have, sometimes it's not always what it appears, because it's about perceived value of having something. And so, for example, when people indulge in social comparison, which is something we do a lot, we think that we must have the latest iPhone, for example, but you've already got an iPhone that works perfectly well, and it's not that you must have it in reality, but you must have it to maintain, appearances or social status or whatever, however you perceive that to be. And so it's actually in reality a nice to have, but it becomes a must have in the perception of the consumer.
yeah. So are you saying that if it's not an actually must to have, but if somehow your product appears like it's must have, it may as well be. It is a must that like graduates it.
Yeah, this is part of marketing as well, as like you have to, frame your solution as something that's going to solve the pain point of the prospect, but also if you frame it in certain ways. So, for example, like, these people are doing it and they're experiencing success, and you could be like them, or whatever the message is, just a bit of social comparison, then the perception of the prospective client goes from, this is not important to me, it's just something that's nice and shiny, but I don't need it, to, oh shit, I need that because other people have it and I want to be like them. And that's a blunt breakdown of the messaging, but that's basically what it is. People come to any kind of messaging about any kind of product or service and say, well, what's in it for me? That's like the first question. And so if you can think a little bit about these things when you're designing your MVP, if you want to sell this thing, then these are things that you should think about out the gate, I think. Not too much so that you stagnate, but enough to think, well, how am I going to frame this, and therefore what features do I have to build into my product or service?
Yeah. Yeah, important point there is like not to stagnate. I've definitely been caught building or like try for extended periods of time by myself, like only with my own point of view, my own perspective, without venturing out and getting something out there to get feedback on, like, is it useful or not, And that's the big point here on the red flags is, I think, the solution in search of a problem. If you find that you're in that box, um, maybe really like come back to the checklist or go to a creative thinking environment or something to get an entirely different route going on. Because if you get stuck with in the idea of you've come up with a solution but there's not an actual problem for it, I think that's probably maybe the biggest one on this slide is that I think also the biggest red flag on the slide. Um, like don't do that. If you've cooked up a solution and there's not an actual problem for it, uh, well, I guess I mean, I think that puts you in hobby zone for yourself. I don't think that's even benefiting you if it's not even a problem, or uh, or certainly not for anybody else for money in exchange for money. But there's also nothing wrong with a hobby, but just make sure that if you're in that, you're just like cooking up different solutions. Maybe if that's a creative zone for you, sure. But don't expect that to come into anything um, value producing, if that makes
Yeah, it links
sense.
back to like last week's call on feedback is you have to get out of your head as fast as possible if you want to iterate at a speed that's helpful to you and will address any, certainly if you're trying to address a gap in the market, especially with the way that the speed that things in app development or AI move these days. So if you're ideating, you're in your head until you start getting feedback from others, and you can do that in the ideation phase. But you've got to realize if you're parked in your head and you're not actually producing anything and testing it on real life humans, um, you're not getting data that you need to actually figure out how to iterate on the product or the way that you're pitching the product. So you need to, one of the things that we want to touch on in this call is that it's really important to set yourself limits, force decisions, and actually move swiftly to get things out and test it on the market, get real feedback, and see what comes back to see if the problem you think exists actually exists, and people will put time and effort or money into having that problem solved by using your product.
Yeah. Out of your head as soon as possible. And into the MVP development strategy. I'll look at slide 2 now if we want to direct there. But and a lot of these are just, I don't think any of these are probably hard or fast rules, right? Especially these timelines like weeks and stuff like that. I think, replace those with what fits best for you. But the idea to move from idea to MVP development so that you can maintain the momentum and keep progressing in some way. So from you go through your idea validation checklist, all that kind of stuff. Okay, MVP. What do we absolutely need in the MVP? Like whatever the critical feature is that solves the core problem and the easiest, best way to do it in the shortest amount of time to get feedback, like to ensure that somebody else has this problem, they use your a rudimentary solution, and then they agree like, yes, this is a problem, or this tool will help with this problem. And it doesn't have to be the same flow. Like if you if your end game is to be a web app with all, fully deployed online and back-end services and all this fancy stuff that comes with full scalability, your initial workflow might be an N8N workflow that's just testing the MVP. That's kind of hard to do because you're breaking it down into two different steps. With the tools, the agentic tools that are available now, it's a little easier to kind of skip to your end product or closer to your end product and then confirm. And then like that's your MVP, but that's a rabbit hole as we've just discussed. Now, if you're like iterating inside your own head for weeks and weeks, so the importance here is like it may be worth considering doing the super simple single feature N8N workflow or whatever the most bare minimum tool to solve the problem, to validate the problem might be the best option before jumping into agentic tools, which is something that I tend to do, honestly. So, um, okay, so basic
And why is that?
authentication.
Is that because it's,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, why is Why do you do that? Is it because it's your comfort zone? It's because that's where your curiosity is. It's the things that you want to learn about. Are you just avoiding some parts of the development process, or is that just a habit, or is it, chasing curiosity? Why do you do that?
It's a little multi. I'm definitely like it's more flashy to me, so I'm like I'm a little quicker to that because it's more fun. Probably because I like seeing the LLMs, print out the 1,000 lines of code in a second. It's just cool. So there's definitely an element of that, but it's also an element of it's like for the example that I'm kind of mentioning, if it takes me, 10 hours to figure out how to build an N8N workflow for the MVP, and it's like low to medium look and feel at best. So then I go find, 10 users. Can you look at this and confirm if you would use this or not? It's hard for them to actually envision the end product with kind of um, a basic display or an MVP. So if they're going to initially be turned off just initially because it's like not uh, flashy enough or it doesn't look like a finished enough product, then that may be detrimental to the feedback. Another thing is if it takes me 10 hours to do this and it would have taken 15 hours to do the whole thing with agentic AI tools. So I did 10 hours of 10 hours of N8N workflow for the MVP, and then I have to do another 15 hours of the agentic flow, which if I would have just done the 15 hours up front, but then it's hard to tell because then what if it would have taken 50 hours with the agentic tools, so it's not cut and dry. There's lots of things just between those comparisons. Um, and
But a
each
couple of
situation,
important points then, like it's important to understand. The reason I asked is it's important to understand your individual process, right? If you
yeah,
actually want to make things and sell them, then it's important to realize what you're attracted to because you like it or because it's easier or whatever the reason you're attracted to it, what part of the process you like to do first and where you experience more flow, more enjoyment, and which parts of the process you enjoy least. Because you have to figure out, well, are those parts that I enjoyed least, how important are they and where do they have to fit in the sequence? Obviously, to make anything, you have to enjoy ideating and you have to enjoy the process enough to get started. If you don't start, then obviously like you're not making anything. So it's important to figure out what you enjoy and do that, but you have to find a way potentially to identify the parts that you're more likely to avoid if they are necessary, figure out how to approach them, like breaking them down into um, time windows that you can tolerate and using a reward for doing that time, and like, or outsourcing if you can delegate or if you're collaborating with somebody. Just actually getting an overall view of the development process to ensure that you're actually doing everything that you need to. Because you touched on an important point. If there's some parts that you are avoiding because maybe you don't like them as much or they're harder for you, often the same thing, but they're important to the quality of the feedback that you would get from anybody or your chances of success in actually creating something that you can sell, then you have to figure out a way to address that challenge. And again, it relates to the place where we started. Basically, it's like realizing what the challenges are for you personally, not just in a business sense, like and what are the challenges to startups in general or making things with AI apps with AI in general, but also for you personally. And these are, you know, figuring out how you feel about different parts of that process, and then weighing that against how important they are, and then figuring out, well, what strategies I can use to address these challenging parts of the process if they are necessary and if they directly impact my success.
Yeah, the famous saying, I don't know how famous it is, no two ways to skin a cat or whatever, like I don't know if skinning cats is a great idea these days, but
Depends how hungry you are.
yeah, till you're hungry. But it really is, some of it's personal preference. There's definitely elements of like common sense where, well, here's a good thing. Here's a good comparison. So Jofi's workflow, he's kind of doing in like more of a um, like N8N type stuff, I think, but workflow type iteration, and in comparison, I think Bobby was probably more on the agentic tool side, based on their end products. I guess I'm not quite sure, but I guess I'm assuming here. That's what it looks like to me. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's no way Bobby did that with N8N. So I'm sure he's using, I think you mentioned Cursor. But the point is that there's different approaches for your different needs. So how much time you're going to spend learning about the different approaches versus selecting one, I'm biased here. This is definitely a biased statement, but I think the bigger bang for the buck is the agentic tools, for most solutions. I think maybe if you're drowning in like Excel spreadsheets and stuff at work, and that's your solution that you're trying to solve for, or a problem that you're trying to solve for, I think maybe there's maybe some N8N type things there for you. Um, if you're a content creator and you're looking for like 1,000 different versions of a hook, and a display, or what's the little YouTube image that pops up, whatever that is called, on the, like, that's a
Thumbnail.
big, what is that? Oh,
Thumbnail.
thumbnail. Yeah. 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 There's a big market around thumbnails because these the YouTubers that go through and if they have shitty thumbnails versus the ones that have good flashy ones that are attractive, uh, it can make a big impact. So there's a lot of there's a market around that, and you could generate like 1,000 versions of a thumbnail for for your YouTube video in a few seconds um, with N8N. So I think that might be a better N8N type of workflow. But bottom line, explore the different options and how the MVP can work for you, and how in depth you want to go from MVP to the basically like a scalable product initially. There's some blur there, so you got to find that yourself. Um,
Yeah, you want to find the right tools for the job and realize that you are part of the job. The creator is in the machine. So finding the right tool means you actually have to consider your skill set, what you're interested in learning and doing the job, because you want to actually, the way that you get value out of creating things and trying to sell them is that you make sure that you learn regardless and you get something out of it regardless. So, exploring new tools and learning how to use them, even if they don't help you on this particular product, then they might help you on the next one. On the next one, you get something out of it. So that's value for yourself. But it's also in business is a journey of self-discovery. So like as you're trying to create MVPs and test them on the market and just decide whether to develop it further and then trying to sell it, it's like a helping you see yourself, like what are the challenges for you emotionally in this process, what things do you like in the process, what things do you dislike, are you managing your time and productivity effectively? Should you be collaborating? So this is the personal journey in it all. So it's important to figure out, like, what tool is best, not just for the thing that you're trying to create, but for you personally, based on your skills and the challenges that you face and what you're trying to get out of the process itself. So if you can find reward in the process, then that's part of the way to crack the code of living well, isn't it? If you whatever you have to do that requires effort, if you can find reward in that, then that's how you win. Because even if you don't get the outcome that you're hoping for, you still went through the process, and that in itself was rewarding and helped you grow and enjoy what you were doing.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that's probably the most key, right? If you're not enjoying it, it's going to be a real hard uphill battle because it's even if you are enjoying, it's already difficult. So play to your strengths and then fill in the gaps with the things that, um, like I say, weaknesses, but the things that are more challenging for you, either approach them as challenges and get through them, or offload to either AI as long as it's not your uh, intellect, and then or a co-founder or something like that. If you're really going for a true like startup thing, like a straight up YC Combinator type or Y Combinator, whatever it is. Startup, a big, huge ordeal, then maybe co-founder type situation where um, they're more technical if you're more marketing or vice versa. Filling that gap with a co-founder might be a right move. I think we even have some discussion points on that in here.
I think
But
it's
in any
critical,
case,
man, because like a lot of startups fail because people have a good idea, but they are not, they don't want to look at what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. And they don't want to look at the overall process of bringing a product to market. And so they do what they like, or they do what they're strong at, and they ignore certain areas. So how many times in Web3 do we see people that have really good idea, and it's a really technical idea, and it's totally a viable product, but then they don't know anything about marketing, and they don't get someone else to come in and help them with that aspect. And obviously, you can have a great idea, but if you can't capture attention, then you're not going to be able to sell it to anybody. So, understanding your strengths and weaknesses and being honest about what you enjoy, or what you lack, where you lack skills, and then thinking about, well, is it worth me developing that skill set? Or is it better to delegate and then work on the parts that I'm stronger at? Collaboration is a great point of leverage if you can find good people to work with who can fill in the areas in which you're weak with their strengths. Then it's again, get out of your head and start working with people and finding out what you really know, what you really understand, what you enjoy. Because if you're not, I mean, doing startups in general is hard. And so if you're not finding some enjoyment in that process and you're not growing in that process, then you're going to give up. And I think one of the big reasons why people fail is they're actually avoiding their weaknesses or not being strategic about how to either develop them or delegate to others, collaborate with others to address weaknesses, because you have to find enjoyment in anything you do. Otherwise, that helps you work hard because then it feels like meaningful. But if you're not enjoying it and it's hard, then sooner or later you're going to want to stop.
yeah, it's just not fun. There's pros and cons to it too, though. If you're going co-founder route, you're opening up doors big time. Like, can you trust the other person? Obviously, that's a requirement. But you can't always perfectly nail it. You can't always perfectly nail their the future. Obviously, you can't tell. So you have to you're gonna have to develop more, spend more time on working together, making sure that you're working well together. So your interpersonal communication skills, all that stuff, like is more important if you're finding a co-founder rather than if you're just doing it solo. Um,
It's
some
like you have to consider if it's worth it too, like because working with people is also hard. So you have to figure out, well, what are the challenges there? How do I select people to collaborate with? To what degree do I have to protect my interests? Like, what's the communication flow going to need to be like for us to succeed? Is it better off me just working by myself and then testing it on people that I know? Like, you have to, that's part of the personal journey as well. It's another reason why things fail is that people work with others who are either not trustworthy or when in doing so they don't protect their interests. There's there's pros and cons to everything, every path you'll choose, and you have to figure out what's actually going to work best so that you increase your enjoyment, you decrease your risk, and increase your chances of success.
Yeah, and that all those risks with like a co-founder, they all kind of just it all became more risky in the last year and a half because of the AI tools. Because if you're not, 2 years ago, if you were not technical, you needed a technical co-founder, most likely. And now, if you have some of the parts like the idea and maybe the marketing, or if you're eventually willing to pay like a marketing firm to outsource that and not be part of a co-founder situation, you can fill that gap with the technical side now with AI tools. People are rumoring or speculating or suggesting that like the um, trillionaire, first billionaire single like solo founder is is working on their products right now. It's not happened yet, right? Like Elon Musk, he had a lot of different people along the way that both helped him and so whoever's messing with the Excalibur drive, you just be careful. I can fix it, but try not to drag everything around. Um, the first like solo developer that's or a founder that is going to build the product themselves, launch it themselves, and become a billionaire and a trillionaire based off it is probably already cooking their product. So, uh, like it could be anybody in this crowd right now. So let's get after it, I guess. Um, so on to like a little more MVP development thing, like a basic authentication and security. Like you got to consider this in Bobby's game. He did like a whitelist security method. So basically, um, nobody could just sign in and gain authentication and access to the game, which would lead to like DDoS, decentralized um, denial of service attacks. It's basically where somebody like floods your services. If you're not at the scalable, full security, full production zone yet, and you're just in MVP, somebody could come in and crash your resources by just doing a DDoS attack, denial of service, and basically shut it down. So you need to protect it. You always need to be thinking about security methods or security, um, what's it called? Security measures, protection for your MVP all the way through to production. So always be thinking about that. Um, yeah, and then this is kind of what I said: minimal viable UX, the user experience, functional. Like if it's gonna deter, if it's so rudimentary, it's gonna deter and distract from what you what you want the testers to see, then maybe you need to beef it up a little bit and make a better user experience versus just, but maybe they truly all only care about like, all I want is the spreadsheet in the email at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day for to look at. I don't care about what it looks like. I just want the spreadsheet. That might be a N8N solution, versus you don't need a front end, you don't need a huge user experience. They just want the product and they want the solution, they want their problem solved. So some differences there, and then nice to have right here. This is something, persistent data history. Each one of these like nice to have features is a little bit leaning more towards I need to start with this agentic tool because each one is a little bit more and more and more comprehensive. Um, so persistence data history, if you want to start the users getting their accounts kind of set up already and they can see their progress right off the bat. You're kind of escaping the more nice to haves you add in, the less you're in MVP, and the more you're in more of your like mid testing product. Um, Social features, yeah, like if you're add in your X account or add in a automated post so that your testers can post on X directly from your app, something like that. um, Analytics, you can get some of these from like your deployment stuff like Vercel, or you could build it in. Mobile apps, mobile apps are a huge pain, I think, for me. And I think for a lot of people, they're kind of a like a next level boss type of thing to approach. So for a mobile app, I don't know if mobile app even belongs even close to MVP, honestly. But um, if you're a native mobile app developer, maybe you probably start with that because maybe that's your strength, right? Um, so the time boxing approach, like that's kind of these time frames, these are on you and your schedule. These are just examples, um, but a way to think of it is like phase one, if that's week 1 and 2, your core features, and then week 3, integration and authorization, week 4 or phase 4, whatever you're going to add in there, uh, testing deployment. So break it down into phases and assign some respectable time frame that fits within you. That's what Brendan's saying about goals, and we'll get into a little more detail with deadlines, the slide 6, uh, and how putting a deadline on yourself, decide whether you need to do the MVP first or go into full development production workflows, or point is uh, time time and adding in um, the deadline will or can, I think probably will help you um, keep the momentum going, keep going in the right direction, probably even stave off like ideas of quitting. If you're like it's hard and there is no deadline, you're maybe more inclined to like say, well, I'll just get to it later. I'll get to it later. And you add up 10 I'll get to it laters, and now you've moved on to something else and it's dead in the water. Versus if there's a deadline, you're thinking like, I can't get to it later. I need to get it done now. Put some agency in that and like uh, keep that momentum. That those are all like fighting factors against giving up. And at some point along these lines, like if you have a bad idea, it is like at some point maybe you do need to give up. If it's dead in the water at idea, if it's a bad idea or if solution, maybe you do give up. Or if you get to MVP and your initial users of the MVP get back to you and like, no, try again. This is completely useless. Hopefully you're getting honest enough feedback in your MVP to make that. And then you know, then you have the available time and resources to take your lessons learned from this, go back to stage one, find a new idea. Like, so you're not necessarily giving up, maybe just either either um, either shifting your idea, changing it entirely, uh, or whatever you need to do. So, but time box,
It is a challenge. You got to figure out. That's why it's important to iterate and get out of your head and get actual feedback from other people about the solution you're offering, the product that you're making. Because the longer you spend putting in effort without getting real feedback, the more of a sunk cost fallacy you'll develop because you've put time into it, you've put effort into it, you really think the idea is good, and then if you finally get around to actually testing it and getting feedback and people tell you that they're not vibing with it, you don't want to accept that. So the faster deadlines are important because you're forcing yourself to make decisions and you want to try to get to market testing feedback as fast as possible with as little effort and time sunk into it and money sunk into it. So test the idea as fast as possible. And this goes with like protecting your risk and working with other people as well. It's like, don't put yourself at risk immediately by sinking money and effort into things more than is necessary. Just try to iterate quickly and start testing and then continuing to develop it. And then you get the information that you need to decide whether it's just a matter of developing what you have or whether you need a full pivot because the market's telling you it wants some different solution. Now, it's really important to get that information back. And the faster you iterate, the easier it will be for you to remain flexible about your idea because you're not in love with it and you haven't sunk all this time, effort, or money into it. It's easier to actually change directions. So, like, when we think of success or failure, it's often tied to fear, and that creates this binary thinking about outcomes. It's like I'm going to succeed or I'm going to fail. But if you're taking a more process-based approach and certainly, trying to find growth in that process, then you're winning by completing the process. But also it's like the idea that you're experimenting, you're iterating, you're trying to find the idea as you build the ideas. That means that you're not creating false ends of like, I'm going to either succeed or fail. You like realize that, oh no, it's a path, it's a journey. I'm going to keep trying things and testing things and getting feedback until I find something that works that I want to make.
yeah, spot on. We just got to keep going, keep that momentum going, and get something out the door. And I've tried like 100 different apps, and then um, not getting stuff out the door in and been stuck in my own head, and then abandoned the project. So I've been there on a lot of different, I guess, attempts. Some of it, I could go back and either rationalize or justify, or some of it may be valid or not, but some of those reasons would be like me and the technology weren't quite ready yet there to get to the product that was going to be usable. A good example of that would be a long time ago. I dropped in, what was the name of it? I don't know, some emotion rating app. So kind of like you go in and you rate your emotion like a little journal. You can make some notes about it, and then the idea was roughly to go like take it to a counselor or a therapist or whatever, so that they can see what were you thinking on Tuesday, what were you thinking on Wednesday, because if somebody's having mental health issues or just a counseling session or whatever else, like, oh, how have you felt this week? Well, I don't know, but now if you have a journal that your counselor can see then it's a good place to start essentially. And then um, that kind of ended up dead in the water because I didn't have the skills with the technology to get to the end goal. Like I was starting out to run into a lot of problems like Bobby's doing, like with the famous phrase, when I fix something, something else breaks. We'll hit on that more later, but uh, that was kind of abandoned. And then more recently, I got a product kind of out the door. If you guys saw the Million Shark Tank, and this is the 70% rule. It wasn't, it's not super great. It's not super good. It's not perfect. And, but that deadline, when who's chiming in? Go ahead. Somebody? No? Okay. Um, I was able to get the product out there and I had a deadline with the Million Shark Tank. Like it's going to have to be good enough for that. So it helped me get it out the door, maintain that momentum. And I would think that was an MVP development. I don't think that's more than an MVP, but in any case, that product, Think Now, was inspired by the conversations we've had here about critical thinking and potential foreseeable problem. And then it was reinforced um, by the consecutive, I kept hearing, we mentioned in the next session, the Joe Rogan and Matthew McConaughey talked about that problem. And then again, the next episode we had, there was the Star Talk with Natalia, the MIT researcher. So like there was repetitive, like um, confirmation that it's on some people's minds. So go ahead and make the deadline, Million Shark Tank, get something out there and see it, and then see if anything is, see if there's any users that are willing to like provide feedback, uh, free, like check it out, tell me what you think, get the feedback, and then get it out the door. So the think now is definitely, I think, a good example of the 70% rule here, where if it's good enough, like, and I know the perfectionists in the crowd are like cringing when you hear the term good enough, but me personally, I'm definitely a good enough guy. There's very few things in my life that I would say that I'm a perfectionist on. Like if it's good enough, freaking send it, get it out the door, ship it, and get real usage. That will tell you where you need to go. And it may be go back to square one, and it may be fine tune, it may be pivot, it may be it's near perfect, make a few adjustments here and start the marketing campaign heavy because you got something here. But you don't know that unless you at least get that deadline set and get the 70%, just ship it. Whatever you have, do it. Like Bobby's is a good example here too, because it was a good to great product, but it's not perfect, right? It's not like Bobby could take that and go sell his game to Sony or Gunzilla for several $1 million or whatever. That's not there yet. But is it 70%? Definitely. Is it playable? Definitely. Is it fun? Definitely. Is it in a situation where he can get valuable user feedback to decide to where to go from here? Definitely. So he shipped it. It's out there. So kudos on Bobby for the 70% rule there too. Like that was a good point to get it out there, I think. And I think it showed throughout the community too. So um, shout out to Bobby.
Yeah,
Thanks
man,
for that.
committing to yeah, man, the game's super fun, and people are getting enjoyment out of it, and he's getting data back. He's like how people are using the game. He's getting feedback. So he's learning and continuing to improve the game. And what you've touched on is super important. It's like if you commit to things like competitions, something like the Million Shark Tank thing, or you set deadlines for yourself for getting certain stages done, and just like forcing decision making, it's really important. So if you're a perfectionist, basically you're judging yourself all the time. And inherent in this message is like, oh, it's not good enough. It's never good enough as it is. And if you keep fixing and fixing and fixing, it'll never be good enough because of your mindset. And you'll never be good enough because you think, oh, I've got to always produce perfect things to be good enough. It's like, that's the personal journey. That's where you actually can see yourself going, oh shit, I just judge myself all the time. Where does this inner critic come from? This is a voice that you learned when you were young, but through being praised for good outcomes and receiving punishment for bad outcomes, but it's not you. And so part of this personal journey of setting deadlines, committing to things, and just trying to take this experimental approach and iterating, it's developing yourself because you are inherently valuable. You're good enough as you are, and you've got to realize that if you're a perfectionist and you're always trying to improve yourself so that you can be good enough, and that is reflected in the way that you make products, then that self-critical voice, that's not you. And if you really want to grow and improve yourself, then you want to lean into the discomfort of shipping things when you don't think it's ready, just so that you can get some feedback and learn more and develop it faster. That's actually the way to be better at what you're doing, not trying to perfect it and perfect it and perfect it and never releasing it. If you actually want to do a better job, if you really want to do a better job, then get it good enough and ship it and get some feedback, and then you can improve it faster. That's actually the way to be better, literally. And the only thing holding you back is not the product, it's the fear of failure, and that comes from actually just judging yourself for based on, and that being reflected in the way that you create things and what you're prepared to release. But yeah, it's like emotional awareness, self-awareness, and actually leaning into those challenges. That's part of the personal journey. Business is a personal journey, and you can see it at every level, whether you're just fucking around with some AI agents to make a product, but or whether you're trying to start a multi-million dollar company. It's like, it's just a reflection of how you actually think of yourself and how you represent yourself in the world.
Yeah, so claiming to be a perfectionist, we're actually even being one, and it can turn into a detriment and an excuse too. So it can be a strength. Um, don't let it hold you back either. And if you wrap in like the iterative process and getting the 70% product out as part of being the perfectionist process, it's that kind of reduces the ability that you might have as a perfectionist to say, well, the product's not perfect yet. Basically, it reduces the option for you to use your perfectionist mentality or idea about yourself to from being an excuse, because now that 70% is wrapped in part of the perfectionist process. That's part of being a perfectionist, is getting that 70% rule product out, and then continuing with the perfectionist product for the excellence in the end.
Yeah, well, that's the way that you improve it faster. So if you actually want to do a good job because you're concerned about that, then get it out. And so that's what I mean. People are avoiding the fear of getting it out and this imagined judgment of shipping something that's not perfect. But perfect doesn't exist, and the way to improve it is to just get it out and get feedback. And it's not a reflection of your self-worth. You prove yourself valuable by delivering things. In a business sense, your value is in what you can deliver and what you can sell. It's not You're not valuable because you sit in your head and you're afraid to actually reveal anything that you've created to anybody because you're busy judging yourself. That's not perfection at all. It's quite an irony, procrastinating in search of perfection, and in the process you're just you're not making anything, so you're far from perfect. And in business, like, you're closer to perfection if you're able to actually approach the discomfort of failing fast and often, which is obviously pretty hard to do. People know that that's how you learn, but we still avoid it, right? And why do we avoid it? Not for logical reasons, but for emotional reasons.
Yeah, that's so we've got a whole slide on the slide 6, deadlines and decision making. I don't know if we want to skip ahead to that now and then come back to market testing and stuff. Um, I think that so I'm still good to proceed, but we've already been going for an hour and a half, which is fine. I'm still good. I'll go all day, but I think just so that we make sure that people could get something going out the door today, get to the 70% rule, and then um, market testing. Let's see. So we might not get to agentic tools today, which I would definitely want to get everything today. But the agentic tools, if anybody has any questions about that and stuff, like come in the AI chat. I'll throughout the week. We'll talk about your specific kind of workflow a little bit. If I or if anybody else has any experience with something that you're looking into, because I think there's too much there to even go in for specifically for our call. Like maybe we'll breeze through that on the call, and then you guys can hit me up in chat specifically on the different, Claude Code, Cursor, all that kind of stuff. But so maybe we'll skip that one a little bit, but I think probably lean on our next little slide on market testing. Um, Bobby did a great job here on this one. If you guys didn't notice, he released it in the AI chat first for like 5 to 10 people to get a little bit of tiny feedback to get the most critical things like, does it even work? Like, is there any huge problems? Can you log in? And again, that login, he used the basic authentication for security. But can only a few people, right out the gate. Can you log in? Does it work? I don't need your opinions on, oh, the guy should jump a little higher this way, or this was too, like, we don't need any of the little details on that. We just need, does it work for 5 to 10 people? And then you start to go for more in depth on your, so he handled that in the AI chat. And then he went, once he got some good, valuable feedback, yep, it works. There's nothing critical. Uh, he was able to test the analytics on his side to see like if people could actually finish the game, stuff like that, and make sure that it didn't crash on his end. If like 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 people are playing at the same time, doesn't crash. And then he dropped the link in. Did he drop in a holders chat? I think but he still controlled the flow. He didn't say like it was a free for all for 10,000 people to sign up. He still managed that authentication, that he has to whitelist the username, the Discord username into the app. So it's like perfect execution there on stepping up to the next middle one where he's getting more than 10 people involved in, and now he's validating like the value prop, right? Like, is the game fun? Is it playable? Now collecting the more feedback, like the gun only works for level 3. You need to bring the laser beam in sooner so you have better game flow, all that kind of stuff, right? So great graduation from like an inner um, market test to like a middle group. And then I don't think he's here yet. For me, for Think Now, I was here, did this, and then graduated here, maybe a little too soon, but I have not even got here. So, well, I implemented this path, but did not get the interactions there. So,
Why do you say it was
Joe,
too soon?
say that again.
Why do you say that you got to the middle stage of market testing too soon?
Um, Maybe miswording that a little bit. So, I didn't get, I got enough here in the inner 5 to 10 people to move on. Like the product doesn't crash, it works okay. Uh, but the exposure there, so it's not too soon. It's appropriate level position and development, I think, for it, but not, um, I guess not, there hasn't been 50 or 100 people that have signed up or tested it yet. And now it's down because of Nillian's endpoint has crashed. So it's nothing I can do about that. So, but there's an important note on there about you being reliant on another technology for your startup is if it crashes, then you crash. It's a precarious situation to put yourself in. So that's a note for myself. I could do it with a different AI tool, but part of the value proposition is the privacy, and that's um, imperative for that workflow. So I either redesign an internal Nillion or rely on Nillion. So right now it's rely on Nillion for the value or for the privacy portion. So that's get more users in your mid in your midsection. So I'm here. I'm not graduating here until I get here. This is beta phase essentially. You provide links or some access to limited amount of people to get that feedback on what needs to happen better. This is where you're going to start getting your tweaks beyond your critical failure points.
Yeah, it's really important that you mentioned that point of vulnerability there. So right now you're on pause because you are relying on the Nillion API. So it's important to, as touched on winning through intimidation, as like he says, to be prepared, to feel confident, you want to be uber prepared. And to be prepared, you have to attempt to anticipate all points of failure and then create potential solutions to those failures. So it's not possible to foresee everything, but like in terms of getting your developing an MVP to getting to a production level thing, you want to be aware of what points are potential points of critical failure, just so that you don't sink a lot of time and effort into something and then just have the rug pulled out from underneath you.
Yeah, that's that point actually, I mean, obviously it is huge. Maybe it should have even been in the ideation phase to like reflect, ask yourself, like, does my product rely on somebody else? And now that we're talking about it, I suppose I could see if, because I only have the testnet API, I suppose I could see if the API key, the production is functional, which I would imagine it probably is. So that would be a potential solution um, I could I could do, or I could put a disclaimer like, in beta phase, it's not private. That would be sufficient. So then I could continue testing the idea in the framework, just being transparent, letting the people know, the users, that it's not private. So that would be another potential solution. And then how I actually discovered this problem was the exact the little mini app I showed a little while ago about testing the Nillion API. That's how I discovered what the problem was because like I was going down troubleshooting errors in the app live in my in the think now, like why am I not getting chat responses? It was just working, and I was like going through trying to fix the app when I should have. It's like when you're troubleshooting, like why is the TV not working? Oh, check if it's plugged in. You want to do the most basic thing first, but how many times do you like change the batteries in the remote? Try a different remote, go hit the buttons on the TV, all this kind of stuff. Um, but did you even check if it's plugged in? Well, my API key is essentially not plugged in, so that's why the chat was not working. And I skipped ahead to troubleshooting a whole bunch of different things, which probably caused a few problems actually. So now I have to go undo those things. So there's that.
Yeah, it links to what you said about Bobby's game too, how he controlled the users to prevent any kind of DDoS attack, and also to get graduated data on the game use. In that is a consideration of what data he wants and how to control use to avoid potential critical problems. So, yeah, I think it is important to consider your points of catastrophic failure and plan accordingly. So at the start phase, you could just think about, if you got your idea sketched up for the MVP, you could think about, well, if I was a malevolent party, like what could I do to like completely destroy this project? What could I do to attack this product or service? And that might help you see your potential points of failure.
Yeah, and the product is, or the competition is steep too, like I mean, some people could say that ChatGPT just crushed N8N with their like new workflow thing. I haven't tried it, so I don't have an opinion on it, but the word on the street is it's pretty good. And if N8N is a little more like not very user friendly, so then maybe they're getting crushed. But the point is that the attacks are maybe not always malicious. Um, maybe it's just like fierce competition, and that's what it is. Like, so uh, I guess I forgot where I was going with that, but prepare yourself for the issues that will arise. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's just it was just a framing I used to, is maybe a useful way to think about catastrophic failure points or things that will stop you in your product development.
Yeah. So then when or if, you or myself or Bobby are ready to like take on this outer cold audience, this is like when it's straight up out in the world. And maybe I even tried this on X trying to get people on, so that may qualify as that, but maybe I got a bit ahead on that one, but who cares? Just go and see. But then um if or whenever you're ready to graduate here, now you're talking about a cold audience. So, back for Bobby's example, friends or family, he used like the AI chat, 5 to 10 people. The middle group, the holders chat, a warm network, uh, validated the value prop. He followed this almost like to a T, honestly. So it's pretty cool to see. And then at some point, when he's ready to go with a cold audience, I would imagine it's probably going to be a semi-useful tool if or when he's able to get it out to a cold audience to attract people to vVv. So it, if the game ends up being a cold audience hit, some people out there, oh, what's this? Click on it, play it for a minute. Oh, this is fun. What is vVv? And then come into the server. That'd be, super cool. Um, so I'm not speaking for Bobby on this one. If he's going to do that or not, I don't know. But that would be an example of like a cold audience of and how he could test acquisition. Some key metrics on um, like validation signal. Uh, if you're getting like, is the market testing working? If you're getting retention, if people are coming back to play the game more or whatever else, the feature usage, if you're getting good feedback, this is like a key metric that your market testing is working. If you're not getting any feedback, then maybe either you need to reconsider your MVP or even reconsider your idea, or maybe just reconsider your market testing approach. But and then validation of signal through your market testing if your app is like tool, your SaaS, whatever, is starting to graduate. If if users are describing the value in their own words. So here in phase one, Bobby's asking specifically, is there any critical feedback? Like, is the game functional? Yes or no? Does it crash? Are you able to complete it? Yes or no? Not this huge stuff, not your own words, right? And then graduating to warm network, structured feedback, and then like open feedback in kind of phase three. If you're getting value in their own words, wow, this game is so fun. Oh, your app totally is helping me do this. Whatever. This is a validation signal that is kind of key that your market testing is valid and that your app is graduating uh, from your MVP. Like commit more resources because you have validation. Finish the product, get it out there. If that all makes sense. Any questions or comments on market testing and validation? That was pretty good, pretty important like segment there. So, like idea, MVP, market testing, like that's what am I gonna say, like required, or it's like it's important to go through that, I think, entire flow and process. Okay. Um, Hopefully everything's still good. Check in on chat. Oh, there's a bunch in chat. Thanks. Oh, Cappy 10. Okay, so I'll catch up on chat comments for a second because I just realized there's a bunch in here. Could you not pop this into Claude project along with your idea? It could pump out project timeline. You could stick to the project instructions and building lean startup for marketing. You could always mimic the competitor. El Capitan, if you can elaborate on, could you pop this into Claude project? I'm not sure what you mean by that, but in assumption, I mean, generally, yes. Basically, I'm a huge Claude code fan, not really a Claude desktop fan. Oh, this Excalibur steps. Yeah, in fact, let me see if I can find my so how I typically create these Excalibur um, presentations or whatever, I kind of collect a few key points that I want to like figure out throughout the week or discuss, and then I make a like a project conversation outline, and then I make a summary, and I tell Claude to make me slideshows based off of the conversation outline. And um, don't know. Well, let's do this. This is probably going to be, this might be a little too long, but Excalibur steps. So my point here, Bob, or El Capitan, is that the Excalibur steps is in a JSON. You could probably drop the whole JSON in Claude Code or something like that. Or you could drop a MD file like this. This is the outline. You could drop that into Claude Code and say like, use this as guidance for our project for the development process or something like that. But in any case, yeah, you totally could. And that's one of the workflows that are probably that we could talk about. But that is definitely in like the tile 5 agentic workflow. That's part of that kind of process. Okay. Mhm. Oh yeah, the space was canceled, so we get to have another extended AI chat today. Cool. Oh, okay. Thanks, Victor. Oh, thanks for showing up so late too, Victor. Um, so Rosie B, I was reading a book recently called Zoom: The Faster Way to Make Your Business Happen by Ian Sanders. While it is an older book, the concepts are still mostly relevant and aligned with this conversation. It is only a short read, but worth pursuing or perusing if you are looking for doing a startup. Thanks for the shout out to Zoom: A Faster Way to Make Your Business Happen.
Haven't
Victor,
heard
to
the
read.
word perusing for a while.
Yeah. Another word
Peruse.
that I haven't heard for a while that I'm starting to try use more, Victor, dropped it in our last, what was it? The due diligence prep channel when he said fortnightly. I like, it's an English term phrase, but over here in the US, basically hardly ever use or ever hear the term fortnightly. So I'm trying to use that more. It's kind of a fun word to use. To reach perfection like 95, 99% will cost nearly double the completion time or more based on my previous experiences. Yeah, this is why I'm pretty sure this comment is towards the 70% rule. Like the point of diminishing returns, and that point is in our Excalibur on deadlines. Um, Number 6, the diminishing returns. That's what Victor's talking about in that comment. Is like get to the 70% rule, get your product shipped, because that last bit is point of diminishing returns until at least you get user feedback. And then eventually you may reach like the point of diminishing returns on a polished product, right? So if your product is earning money in full production, in full scalability, coasting, Telegram is a pretty good example of this. Like, they're chasing basically perfection. They're chasing that last like 1 and 2% of perfection, perfecting their product, and it's costing much and much more to chase that more and more, that fine-tuned perfection. That last 1 and 2% is more and more resource intensive. That's the big point in the 70%, or another one of the big points in the 70%, because you can use like a little bit of resources to get most of the product out, get that validation back, and then use more resources only if you're validated. Don't blow all your resources to validating or trying to validate or perfect a product that's not validated yet.
Yeah, it relates to the Pareto principle as well, whereby 20% of your efforts will create 80% of your bottom line, whatever that may be for you, or success, or the money that you make. And it's what Victor said, is that you can get it 70-80% of the way quickly, but then you can spend the same amount of time or more trying to get the other another 10 or 20% improvement, where it's better just to get it out the door, ship it, and get the feedback and figure out if it's actually worth pursuing, putting more time and effort into. It's a super important idea. And I think El Capitan's comment about failing fast often is a challenge, and for him, he said, it's because it's also a fear of success, and that's another interesting thing that is very real for people. Is sometimes people aren't avoiding failure; they're actually avoiding the outcomes that would come if they actually succeeded. Like, for example, if you have success with an MVP and get good feedback, it's like, oh fuck, that means I now need to do all this work and develop it and find people to work with and this and that. Well, there are lots of ways which this story could go, but it's an interesting thing to consider. Sometimes we are afraid to actually succeed. And another way this happens is people think at a deeper psychological layer, think they're not worthy of success, because again, it's like the self-judgment thing, or you've learned to measure your self-worth in certain ways, and quite often I won't say quite often, but people sometimes sabotage their own success because at a deeper layer, unconscious layer, there's a belief that they're actually not worthy of success. This is one reason why people, for example, sabotage their path towards getting into the flow of money. And this is a deep layer, but it's another reason why sometimes people avoid success or make excuses, and under that excuse is actually a self-sabotage strategy. But it happens. But you have to be pretty self-aware to even be motivated to look at these things. But even when you're looking at them, it can take quite some unpacking, and normally looking for patterns in your behavior as you take actions, as you try to do things. And you can also look at patterns in the way that you emotionally respond to different situations and think, well, what are the beliefs that underlie this? Human psychology is like an onion. There's just layers to peel off. And then if you can sort of link some of the beliefs you think might exist to your personal history, and then test them with actions that you wouldn't normally take, and see how that feels, then that can give you a bit more information as to why you might be avoiding certain behaviors or doing things like sabotaging your own success or procrastinating. Procrastination is avoidance of negative emotion generally, and so you can try and figure out, well, what is the negative emotion I'm avoiding? Like perfectionism, not shipping because you're trying to get something perfect, that's procrastination. Just like thinking, oh, well, I just learn more. I need to learn more before launching my business or shipping my product, because then it'll be perfect. It's procrastination. If you're delaying to avoid some kind of negative emotion, such as like judgment, whether it's self-judgment, social judgment, that might come from failure, and you're tying that to your self-worth, it's just procrastination. So you have to, that's why I say business is a personal development journey, if you choose to see it for what it is.
Yeah, definitely could relate to El Capitan here, Phil. Like kind of a fear of success. It's and sometimes on a subconscious level, like you said, sometimes in a rather apparent. If I did get overly successful, and I don't know if I want to be like the front facing image of the founder. Like there's a lot of exposure to that, but that's kind of what you're asking for in one way or another. So either cross the bridge or don't. But self-sabotaging, there's lots in there too. Yeah.
Sometimes,
Um,
and sometimes if you recognize like what the fear is that's associated with success, then at least if you see it for what it is, you can contrive like strategies for dealing with that fear, either approaching it or doing things like you know
finding solutions that will actually help you. So if you don't want to be the face of a company, then um, does the company have to have a face, for example? It's just like a basic question that you might ask, or like
Yeah.
actually examining what the success really means and if the fear is real, because fear is quite often, well, more often than not, it's just an illusion, and fear puts us into these binary thought processes, and creates false ends, like outcomes that we imagine, but they're not actually real. So, but to do any of this sort of digging into the emotional side and like why you're avoiding success or failure, you actually have to have the guts to actually look at it and identify what it is. And then if you can see, you can iterate on this too, but if you can actually see what you think it is and then test that with certain actions or responses to situations that you wouldn't normally make and see what happens when you take those actions, then that's like iterating on yourself. That's how you grow yourself. So it's a journey too.
Yeah, personally, I don't think any of that is like super deep rooted fears for me, but not wanting to go on a podcast or some type of thing where there's millions of users or viewers. Uh, so my rough answer is, I'm definitely okay being like having a higher digital presence, and then if the product is sufficient where people use it, then they use it. And to your point, like, does it need a face? Um, if it does or doesn't, then maybe I just lean into the products that don't. So
And sometimes these things are multi-layered as well. So like, would success mean that it brings other things that you care about into conflict with developing the business? So if you succeed, you might think, well, that's going to then take more time to work on this business because I'd be obligated to develop it. And that means that I will have less time for maybe friends or family, or maybe success is a threat to your hobby, your curiosity, your interest, your enjoyment in developing things with AI. And if you actually succeed in turning it into a real business, then it becomes more like a job, and you have these beliefs about what a job is. It can be multi-layered, right? And so if you can try and figure out what the fears are, then you can actually examine them and to see if they're true, and if there are other solutions. Like, maybe you do develop it into a business that you can sell, and then instead of that being a conflict with other parts of your life, you just you try to sell the business as is, as you've made it, and then like job done, you made some money, on to the next one, back to creating, on back to balancing your priorities in the way that you like. So yeah, there are lots of ways to skin a cat, as you say, Nathan, but you've got to actually realize like what the challenge is for you, and it's usually it's always it's always fucking emotional, because we think we're making reasonable decisions a lot of the time, but we're reasoning about decisions because of the way that we predict we'll feel about their outcomes, or the way that we want to feel about our reasoning process. Like, and you can prove this by like looking at people who have damage to the connectivity of the emotional parts of their brain. They can't make basic decisions that seem completely trivial, like should I drink some milk or some orange juice? Great combo. They can't decide, and it takes them ages to decide because they don't know how drinking the milk or the orange juice will actually feel. And so it's one of the things emotions are for us, helping us make decisions. And so if you think you're making decisions with reason, then you're not seeing the full equation. There's always an emotion underneath, and typically, often
It's an emotion about how you feel about yourself and making decisions or proceeding with the process in a certain way, or the outcomes that you imagine will develop from taking a certain action.
Yeah, so I guess what we've covered today, we've covered a bunch. I'm still good to go, but I think maybe it's 2 hours, so maybe it's a good place to pause there. Maybe do a quick recap and then save the rest for the next episode. Does that sound okay?
Probably wise if we do like 4-hour marathon, we might exceed people's attention span.
Yeah, or somebody will get bored and go make the billion-dollar company that they've been like, enough of this talk, I'm gonna go do something.
Yeah, we can pick up this stuff on the next one. So maybe quick summary to wrap up, and then we'll call it a day.
Yeah, so we talked about the ideation phase, get an idea out and measure it with some red flags, make sure it's not a completely whimsical thing. Maybe it has some, maybe make sure it has some base. And we're talking about the MVP, getting the MVP of your idea out there and then getting it tested. The big takeaways, I think from ideation, probably make sure you're starting with an actual problem, not a solution, and then make sure that it's not only in your head if you're searching for a problem to sell to others. If it's a problem that you're solving for yourself, go for it. But if you need others to buy into it one way or another, or if you're seeking to provide value to others, then it needs to be others' problems as well, obviously. So MVP, the big takeaway, probably I think the 70% rule. Get 70% and let it fly, and then get into market testing. And I think the big takeaway in market testing is probably the steps. I think take the steps, do the 5 to 10 people first for the critical things. And it could be numbers, differing numbers, but like, and then a warm network to kind of get a little bit of feedback, and then go big with your hundreds to thousands of people. But then the validation, I think maybe the big point here is that if you get the validation from the users in their own words, then you need, like, that's time to step on the gas and go. I'm not necessarily all in, but like, don't hold back at that point and start getting that product 100% marketed and polished for scalability production. So I think, I mean, we definitely talked a little bit on deadlines. That's a key point, giving deadlines to yourself. But we have a whole nother slide for that for next week. Also, for the recording, I dropped in a few little hints on the recording workflows that I'm doing personally, just to kind of give you a little insight on like how Claude Code specifically works. If you want to jump in and look at the recording, find those spots and just kind of see very small tidbits, but nothing big. And that may take us into the agentic tools next week and the development workflow. So thanks for the people who chimed in on the comments; those were helpful. And thanks, Bobby, for dropping that inspirational game to give us something to talk about. And I think anybody else, if wants to chime in, but if not, thanks, and I'll see you guys next week.
All right. Thanks for organizing, brother. It's a good session. And yeah, we'll continue next week with more.
Cheers.